Hi and good morning, and good to see you all, and thank you for the warm welcome and applause. This is my second time in Cleveland in my life, and the first time was about 17 years ago, so I'm sort of discovering what a lovely city it is, so it's great for me to be here today. So I wanted to give you just 30 seconds of background on me, and then I'll sort of jump into the meat of the talk. I'm a San Francisco Bay Area native, and I started out my career essentially as a journalist. I was doing infographics for a large New York City-based newspaper, and then in '96 jumped into doing product and software development, which is what I've been doing for the last 21 odd years. And so I've worked at a combination of really, really large companies and startups, and so hopefully what I'm about to talk about is informed by both, if you will. Sections 2 and 3, which are table setting and product management, you guys already know that. So my concern is that you may find a little bit of that pedantic, but it's basically just for semantic alignment so that when I use certain words, you're aware of what I'm using, because part of being a good product person is being able to communicate well with others. So you'll have to bear with me through 2 and 3. I'll go through that as quickly as possible and then spend a little bit more time on 4 and 5. All right? Here we go. All right, so a little bit of table setting. So, what I wanted to do is to look at some of the foundational aspects of product development. Again, just for semantic alignment. I'm sure you know all of these things already, but that's essentially where I'm starting off. So what is the purpose of business? It's not to pollute the environment as this photo shows. It's actually, to solve problems, right? And so that's the larger purpose. For the purposes of this little illustrative component, I'm looking at what business would you be in if you wanted to create something that simply held a phone in a car, right? Everybody has mobile phones. Car makers have basically ignored that, and so they make it hard for you to stick your phone there. People wedge it in the window shield. BMW has a little thing where you can put it in the thing, but it always falls off and hits somebody in the head. So basically, what would you do to sort of like make it so that people could hold their phones in their cars? So the way that I like to think about things from a product perspective is what is the customer problem that we're trying to solve? And it's my view, it's the purpose of business to solve customer problems. This holder that I've pictured here is probably not the best solution to the problem that we've articulated, because it essentially obscures the entire phone. It's not important, perhaps, that you need to know where you're going, but at least you can see your notifications, right? What is the market for that problem, or the total addressable market for that problem? In this case, since we're talking about mobile phones and cars, and since mobile phone penetration is greater than the entire sort of population of the United States, it's basically everybody who has a car. Then the third question is what percentage of that market do you want to capture? I've just picked 25%, but essentially for any of you who are running your business, whether it's large or small, the percentage of the business that you want to capture is the part that is going to allow you to make enough money to survive and to pay payroll, right? So the solution to the problem, and the most elegant solution to the problem, is a product that solves that original thing that you articulated, which is I need to hold my phone in the car for my money, and I'm not a shill for Anchor, but the Anchor sort of magnetic thing does the best job, and it doesn't get in the way. It's not like the big thing that falls off and hits you in the head again. So that takes us then to the role of product. Again, this is just semantic alignment. Product lead sits in between engineering, UX design, and business. And then the product process is pretty straightforward. Again, it's the articulation of the problem, the market size, what percentage you want to capture. The thesis is the actual product that you build. In our case, it's the little magnetic anchor. And then you build your MVP. And then once that's come out, you get customer validation, iterate, build that thing, and release and launch it. Again, all straightforward, all stuff that you already know, but this is a language issue. This is my view of what the entirety of product development is. The things that I'm talking about in terms of heuristics are more finely tuned towards the product management part, which happens post-launch. So from idea to launch, that from my perspective, I call that product development. Post-launch, I call it product management. You may have different terms, your mileage may vary, but at least those are the terms that I use when I've worked with teams in the past. And so for the purposes of the heuristic portions of the conversation, that's really what I'm talking about. And again, it's just the continuous cycle of release and deploy. So heuristics, for those that don't know or those that do, is basically it's experience-based lenses that offer mental shortcuts for what you're trying to build. They're one of the 6 different tools that any given product manager would use, along with things like brand, quantitative data and analytics, customer feedback and validation, and performance in the market. So more clearly stated, it's a set of experience-based lenses towards product optimization, which is a overly fancy way of saying it's based on your experience. And so The primary heuristic lens that I like to use is, does the product solve the core customer problem, which is, can I actually hold the phone in the car as I've stated that I wanted to do? And I think that that should be the core thing that you ask yourself on a continual basis if you do not already. And so here's a bad example of a phone holder. Again, this one rotates with a steering wheel. And so, I mean, that's interesting, but there's a lot of ongoing back remedies that would sort of have to run sort of concurrently with that. And there are additional aspects around heuristics like marketing and customer relationship management, which I'm not going to include for the purposes of this talk because I view it as a rat hole. So this is sort of the core thing that I really wanted to talk about. It's the differences between heuristics amongst software, hardware, and services, and how you approach those and how to think about those from an experience-based standpoint. So this is the meaty slide. So in terms of heuristic frameworks, for software, hardware, and services, I think it's important to think about, does the application or does the service do what it's supposed to do? I think it's worthwhile to talk a little bit about what I mean by services. Services are things where you're providing, it's a combination of, it's basically real world experiences. So think of hailing a car, think of somebody coming to your house to cook for you, think of massages on demand, think of all the hedonistic things that we've all enabled in some part of our lives that basically allow you to not own stuff or basically to take shortcuts from things that are otherwise tedious. The second lens would be, does it fulfill the primary goal of the stated problem? I think that's super important for both software and hardware, but for services it's a little bit more malleable because until ride-hailing services and music services came along, there's no sense that you needed those. Those were fulfilling unmet needs, more so than I found in my experience software and hardware does. The third is, are settings where you would expect to find them? It's pretty straightforward where settings should be, but I find that people still play around and place them in cryptic, hard-to-find places that make it a little bit hard to adjust things. I think it's important across all three that you have responsive design, which is self-explanatory. And then is the experience appropriate to the interface is super important in a hardware-software perspective, but less so from a service perspective. Again, if you're doing a ride-hailing service, that's pretty self-explanatory. This is where things tend to vary when you go into hardware now in the next couple. Have you taken into account interaction with the rest of the world? And they're different for hardware and for software. So when I was at Samsung, we built television sets, which doesn't sound super sexy because it's not. And so part of what we were thinking about there was, where do you place it in the home? So a lot of folks would contend that they like them to be wall-mounted. What we found is that 17% of all households actually wall-mounted them because it required drilling holes in the wall and otherwise getting a wall-mounted assembly. So we had to focus exclusively on people standing them up on bureaus or on dressers and things of that sort, and what does that look like from an installation perspective. With regards to services, the interactions with the real world are a little bit different. It's things like logistics, like is there traffic on the route that I'm going on? Does the car actually work? Is the car clean? And does the cleaning service have access to the house? And so I've had services again and again services that have failed because they haven't considered some of the real world frameworks that often delay or cause problems with the service consumption itself. And then there's a set of 3 heuristic lenses that are uniquely germane to services that don't apply to either software or hardware, and I'll unpack those a little bit. I had already mentioned logistics, but are your logistics rock solid? And so that's not a question for you, it's someone who's building a service really has to think about. And what we're talking about there is, have you delivered the package that you said you were going to deliver? Has the person actually been picked up? Has the cook or the chef actually arrived at the house? Is it fast? And this is really a question of not, is it performant, but basically, am I waiting 20 minutes while waiting? An ongoing issue from a ride-hailing perspective is supply-demand issues, which is why you often get surge pricing, as it's called, across both of the 2 most popular networks. What that doesn't take into account is that a lot of flights from the West Coast to the East Coast land past midnight, and generally speaking, drivers on a Friday night or a Saturday night don't want to drive past midnight. So basically, if you have to wait an hour after landing past midnight, that's non-performant in the same way that we would address things from a software-hardware perspective. And the last is, how often are you prompting for password and payment? I don't know how much fraud there is for people ordering food with somebody else's account and getting it delivered to somebody else's house, but the amount of password and username prompting that does occur when you order food would suggest that it's a widespread issue. I would suggest that it is not. If you've mistakenly gotten food that was ordered by somebody else, either as a prank or because that account was hacked, I think you would willingly just receive it and eat it. And so that seems to me to be less of a problem. So the constant prompting for passwords seems to me to be a little bit of slight overkill. So I wanted to unpack each one of them, whether it's for software, for hardware, for services, a little bit further. When I think about sort of the criteria that are most important to me from a software perspective, it's really onboarding, how is it easy to get on board, the fit with primary purpose in terms of the problem that it's trying to solve, ease of use, and then super users. So a super user question that has yet to be solved for me from a software service perspective are like music services. I used to use a well-designed service that unfortunately departed and shuffled off this mortal coil about 2 years ago, so I've had to use the main service. You can see I'm avoiding names here because now that I'm at Facebook, I can't really say stuff. So the largest music service. The issue for me is that I spent a lot of time curating playlists, and so they don't seem to contemplate that you would have a playlist that would be over 100 songs. So a lot of the functionality that comes with playback doesn't seem to work for most of my playlists. So I'm stuck in this place where I really love music, but I can't listen to it, right? And so I know that I'm a super user and the entire service shouldn't be attuned to my needs, but it's super frustrating that I can't simply listen to the music that is important to me. On the hardware front, a primary concern is sort of ease of use and setup. And you have to deliver value out of the box when you open it. And so, it can't require setup and then you have to go buy something else and then hook that other item up and then plug that in. That's really non-functional. And so with IKEA, that's the promise. You're buying the multi-umlauted dresser and you know that you're going to assemble it by hand. That's a foregone conclusion. But for any other bit of hardware, that premise goes out of the door, and the assumption is that I can sort of use it directly out of the box. And so that's a set of concerns that I had to get acclimated with as I moved more into doing hardware development after having come from my software roots. There's also some cultural differences that take place. So I work for Samsung. They asked me to come to Korea to help them with innovation culture. And we had a big problem in 2013 with our television sets. And so I was like, well, what's the issue? They're like, well, nobody knows how to set up the set. So if you think about a television set, it's a large planar surface like this set here. And if you think about the fact that 83% of sets are set up on a bureau and a dresser, that means that every single set has to be put on a stand. But for packing purposes, the stand and the television set get put into a box in a flat manner. So the first thing that you have to do when you get your TV set out is put the stand on the bottom of the set so that you can do all the rest of the setup maneuvers. Well, none of that was abundantly clear to users. And there are 2 screws that have to go into both of the legs of the stand. And if you didn't find the plastic pouch with the screws, and if you didn't put the set on a flat, soft surface, like a couch or a bed, you can imagine that disaster would follow. And I said, well, why aren't people finding the quick start guide? Well, in Korea, when you buy the set, because of the 2-company hegemony between LG and Samsung, somebody comes to your house and sets up your TV for you. It's overstaffed, or the Full Employment Act, whatever you want to think about it. In America, that doesn't happen. You get it from Costco or Best Buy or Amazon, and so none of that actually transpires. So the quick start guide was buried in a phantom hidden flap in the bottom of the box because they're like, well, nobody needs to use that. I was like, well, in the States, actually, they do. So we had to redesign the packaging for the sets for 2014, 2015 to get the quick start guide taped to the top of the box, and it was the first thing that you saw when you opened, just to get past the customer complaints around how do I set up my set, right? And so that was just a cultural difference. The perception was like, oh, somebody already comes to your house and sets it up. I was like, not so much, right? So it's just a different market. Last component is adding continual value and time spent. So one of the things that I did while I was there was to help them think about the fact that a television set purchase is a one-time sale. But if you really want to drive value for consumers, it has to be something that you do over time. So essentially, hardware needs to migrate from number of units sold and margin on those units to things like DAUs and MAUs, or at Facebook we use DAPs and MAPs, we use people instead of user. So it has to migrate to those metrics as soon as the item comes out and it starts to get used. You have to think about things in the same way that you would with software, and you have to think about delivering value in the same way that you would with software as well. With services, there's a matter of virality, and so the network effect of a lot of the services is the more people use them, the better that they get, generally speaking. There are always exceptions to the rule. Also ease of use, and so I keep hinting at the home massage service because I lead a stressful life, and like once a month I like somebody to come and give me a massage. That's not kooky or weird, but it could be kooky or weird if you don't take into contemplation the fact that I live up 2 flights of steps, somebody has to hustle a table up 2 flights of steps, and you just want to make sure that it's safe and secure for everybody. So ease of use around some really hard real-world solutions. And then, so some fundamentals also have to be solid. Like, if it's a car-hailing service, I would suggest that the driver should be able to find you. And so last night I was trying to get to my hotel. The driver was across the street. I'm waving, I'm here, I'm here, I'm here, but he did not look to his left. So he drove around the block, and Cleveland's pretty much on a grid, so I don't feel like it's that confusing. But that seems like a fundamental flaw if a car-hailing service and the cars and the people can't find each other and match. Some of the drivers use different techniques for getting you around. So I have one who was simply looking at the map directions, and that was the thing. So steering wheel in one hand, directions in the other. I was like, you could just use the GPS, but they were not comfortable doing that, or not having the volume on for the directions. If you have a housekeeping service, for those of you that use them, the housekeepers don't show up, so your house is not as you expected it to be. Again, I fully admit to being lazy about cleaning my own house, but I do need the housekeeper to show up if I'm paying for the housekeeping service. And then last, GD means many things. I think you can figure this one out. But again, on the 100-song playlist issue, if you have a song playlist that's over 100 songs and you put on shuffle, shuffle does not work. It works on my computer, but it doesn't work on mobile devices. Baffling, right? And so that's a case of, does shuffle work as you would expect it to on a given large music service that I'm not naming? So that brings me close to the end, but basically what I've tried to lay out is like how to think about heuristics as it drives value from what you're doing from a product management perspective. I also think of it as being one of a cluster of sort of 6 lenses that one uses in the product management space. And so I like to think about that from how do you grow your career, how do you grow your skill sets, and what does the future hold for all of you? And so I'd like to leave you with a couple of thoughts on that front. So as I said, heuristics is one of 6, along with, is the product performant, your use of analytics, customer feedback, competitive assessment, and then for some companies, they're also interested in the role that brand plays in assessing the product and its functionality. It's important to me that all of us get better at knowing and understanding these tools, but from an even larger perspective, I think it's important to understand sort of like where you stand with regards to the larger skill set that are necessary for both product development and product management. And so I have a liberal arts degree, so my presumption is that those who are excelling in product management also have some sort of communications and liberal arts background. If you have an engineering background, I am wrong. If you have an MBA background and you went to a pre-professional school, I am wrong. So you can modify this to fit your own skill set. But I think to really excel at the things that we're talking about at this conference, you really have to have a multifaceted skill set that touches upon design, product, engineering, business development, and marketing. Heuristics is a subset of what you're doing in the product lens, but really I'm asking you all to think about how you can grow your skill sets across sort of these 5 criteria. And it's also homage to Chrysler, but that's a separate issue altogether. And so, what I've done is I've done a map of myself. I wouldn't say that I was in the top quintile for engineering or for marketing. Unfortunately, much to my chagrin and sleepless nights, I do a pretty good job from business development. And I started out my career as design and doing infographics, and I would say in the top shelf as far as product goes. What I'm suggesting is that you do a graph yourself of where you think you stand with regards to like who are the people who are at the apex of each one of those vertices, where do you stand relative to them, and then work on sort of like growing your own chart, if you will, in terms of the things that you have mastery over, again, including heuristics and the like. I've come to the end of my talk. I'll be in the back corner afterwards if you have any additional questions or feedback. I really do appreciate and feel honored with the opportunity to speak to you today, and I want to thank you for your time. If you have any further questions, you can hail me on your social media channel of choice, though Facebook would be my preference. I wish you continued success, and I hope that you get a ton of good stuff out of the conference as I've been sitting backstage. Thank you very much for your time and effort.